All right, guys, our next step for this project is learn how to Sgraffito on your mugs. Your mugs need to be leather hard or slightly stiffer than leather hard before you apply your underglaze. So the first step is going to be to apply 2 to 3 coats of underglaze where you want to carve designs. I'm going to use my sunflower stencil, so I want to make sure I am applying underglaze to the whole thing minus the handle because I'm going to do stuff to the background, okay? If your underglaze is thick in the bottle, you can add a few drops of water. Just tap water would be okay, but don't do a ton of water because it might make it too runny and too thin. Underglaze is going to stick best when your clay is dry. So you want to make sure that your underglaze is not too liquidy, but you want to make sure that it's brushable. So if it's been sitting in that cup for a while, you might have to add a little water, okay? I'm just using a regular brush, and you can see how it starts to dry pretty quickly. You want to make sure that each coat is completely dry before you apply your second coat. Okay. The other thing you want to do is apply your second coat in the opposite direction. So I did my first coat vertically. So now I'm going to apply my second coat horizontally just to make sure that I don't have any brush strokes. So I want to make sure it's pretty transparent. The other thing I want to mention is that I'm just using a paintbrush that I had in my toolkit. You guys didn't get a paintbrush in your toolkit, so if you have any brushes at home, feel free to use them. Sounds kind of silly, but a makeup brush works really well because it's very soft. So if you have an old makeup brush or somebody in your family does, just wash it out before and after. You only need 2 coats for dark colors. If you have a yellow or an orange, or you're using like leaf green, you're going to want to apply a 3rd coat probably. The main thing you want to do is let it dry completely before you really touch it and kind of look at it. Because my pot is still really shiny, it's going to take a little bit longer to dry because it's a little bit more leather hard. Okay, the drier your piece is, the quicker the underglaze will dry out. So you can see some parts are not as shiny as others, so it is starting to dry out already. So now it's completely dry. I'm holding it, I'm touching the sides, it's not coming off, it's kind of chalky looking, okay? You still never want to pick it up by the handle though. So every time I'm holding onto this or I'm preparing it to carve, I'm picking up the whole piece from the cylinder part, or I put my fist inside of it when I'm putting the underglaze on. That way I don't mess up the outside. Okay, I'm going to show you how to use your sketch to transfer your design onto your cup. Now, you don't have to do this. You can just freehand it and just use your needle tool and just carve right into your piece. But if you want to use a printed image or a sketch that you did, the easiest way to do that is to put your piece put it right on top and take a pen or a pencil. A ballpoint pen works the best, and just trace over your design. And it's going to lightly transfer the outline of your sketch onto your piece. It's not going to make a pencil mark for the most part. It's just going to lightly press that stencil drawing into your piece. I like to work my way from one side the whole way, like clockwise, the whole way around the piece. That way I know that I didn't miss any little parts. I got every tiny detail. It does take a little bit of time to do this, but it's going to look a lot nicer if you kind of plan it out ahead of time, make any mistakes in your sketchbook. So I'm just kind of peeking at it to make sure that, I know where I started and what I have left. And then this side is done. So I'll show you that it looks just a little indented. You can kind of tell. It's a little tricky to see in the video, but I did transfer it on there. Okay. For the other side of my cup, I'm doing the exact same design, just flipping it upside down. So I'm going to have a mirror image mug. So the reverse of what I just drew. The cool thing about doing it this way is that I already went over the outside with my pencil. So now when I'm tracing through to the back of the paper, I'll actually have the lead from the pencil on the surface of the mug. So again, I try to work clockwise so that way I don't make any mistakes or miss any parts of my lines. And like I said before, it is tedious, but you can see one side has lead and one side doesn't. This side I'm going to carve when it's leather hard, and I'm showing you leather hard carving versus bone dry carving next. And the reason I'm doing this is because leather hard is a little bit easier to carve and get, I don't know, like deeper lines or maybe wider lines or more fine lines, I think, actually. But when it's bone dry, it's going to be more fragile. So you run the risk of breaking it. Okay, so I like to start carving when it's leather hard. I'm using a paintbrush that's dry, not a wet brush, but a dry brush to just push away all the crummies and all those little, pieces of clay that stick to the surface. Just kind of brush them off. Go in, carve a little bit more, take a break every now and then, and kind of brush them off again. And when you're carving with leather hard clay, you kind of want to hold the tool at an angle. That way you get better lines. Now I'm going to take some time and go in and scrape off some of the excess clay. So when you're doing Sgraffito and you're painting the underglaze on, it's really easy to accidentally go outside where you want your underglaze to brush on. And so all you have to do is take a tool like your loop tool or, a needle tool. I'm using a scraper just because it was attached to the other end of my needle tool. And I'm just scraping off the excess underglaze. You can use a wet sponge. It's just a lot more efficient and exact to just scrape it away with your tools. Okay, now this is the other side of my cup, and I am doing this side when it's bone dry. And you'll notice that I have less crummies, I guess less big crummies. My lines are going to be a little bit more exact and defined instead of being kind of thin. You can kind of gradually take clay away when it's bone dry. Like I said, it's up to you when you do this step. You just have to be patient because it can be a tedious process and it's easy to break it if you're too rough. I'm now using my loop tool to remove a large area worth of clay. So I am scraping and removing the larger part of my sunflower, and then I can go back in with my needle tool and carve away more defined, like smaller spaces. So remember, if you're sitting at home by yourself when you're doing this, you can blow off those little crummies. But if you are at school or you're wearing a mask, obviously that's not an option. So use a dry brush to just brush away that excess clay. So what I'm doing now is I flipped it over. I'm getting the other side of my sunflower, making sure that, I have some contrast. I really like to show the difference between the underglaze and the clay itself. Remember, your clay is going to turn white once it's fired. So you'll really see the difference in the contrast between the underglaze and the clay's surface. So I like to include some larger carved area. So like I said, including a larger carved area is really going to help show contrast and show, the difference between the clay surface and the underglaze that you've got going on. So the other thing I wanted to say is don't forget about the background. If you've painted underglaze over the whole thing, kind of scraping away is what I'm doing just to kind of show some texture or some, some new texture to the background. It's not all just lines and blacks, like carved away areas, like blocky. I'm kind of just doing a little bit of layers. And honestly, I don't really have an exact plan. I'm okay with this kind of going with the flow and just kind of seeing what happens. So the whole goal for this project is to use Sgraffito to carve through the surface and showcase that clay that's underneath. So remember, it's okay to have a plan. It's good to have a plan sometimes, but if you want to wing it and do your background a completely different technique, that's okay too. Remember, we're going to be glazing the inside of these a solid color, and the outside will be clear.